Imagine sitting in a small, damp prison cell, stripped of everything you once defined yourself by, your wealth, your reputation, your social standing, and even your name. For Oscar Wilde, this wasn't a thought experiment, it was his reality. In 1897, while serving a long sentence in Reading Gaol, he wrote a long, sprawling letter to his former lover, Lord Alfred Douglas. This letter, titled De Profundis, which is Latin for Out of the Depths, became one of the most profound spiritual autobiographies ever written. It isn't just a collection of grievances or a recount of his downfall, it is a map of a soul undergoing a radical, painful transformation. To understand where Wilde goes, we have to understand where he was. Before his imprisonment, Wilde was the ultimate symbol of the Victorian dandy. He was a man of wit, colour, and sensation, a person who lived for the aesthetic beauty of the moment. He moved through the highest circles of London society, celebrated for his intellect and his ability to turn life into a work of art. But this life of pleasure had a shadow side. Wilde looks back on this period with a mixture of regret and profound honesty. He describes himself as a spendthrift of his own genius, admitting that he spent his creative energy on the pursuit of sensation and the maintenance of a social mask. He lived for the sunlit side of existence, where everything was beautiful, easy, and perhaps a little bit shallow. The descent into the depths was sudden and devastating. He doesn't just lose his freedom, he loses his identity. He describes the crushing weight of public disgrace, the way his family name was dragged through the mud, and the personal agony of watching his mother pass away while he was behind bars. One of the most vivid and painful memories he recounts is the moment he was paraded through Clapham Junction in convict dress. For a man who had lived his entire life through the lens of elegance and style, this public mockery was a soul-shattering humiliation. He describes a year of weeping despair following that event, a period where the weight of his shame felt impossible to bear. In those early days of imprisonment, the world becomes very small. The environment is one of sensory stagnation and repetitive, soul-crushing monotony. The prison life is a loop of grey walls and heavy silence. It was in this vacuum, stripped of all the distractions of his former life, that Wilde began to undergo a metamorphosis. He makes a crucial distinction between being merely sad and experiencing true sorrow. He argues that the world is full of people who perform melancholy, people who use sadness as a fashion or a way to get attention. He calls this a superficial kind of suffering. But what he found in prison was something much deeper and more transformative. He began to see sorrow not as an interruption of life, but as the very medium through which the soul achieves its highest state. This leads us to what he calls the alchemy of the soul. Wilde uses a striking metaphor. He suggests that the soul, much like the human body, needs to consume experiences to grow. Just as we take in food, which is often coarse or even unclean, and transform it through our biology into the energy that sustains us, the soul must absorb the raw, often degrading experiences of life and transmute them into something noble and spiritual. For Wilde, suffering was the fuel for this spiritual digestion. He stopped trying to escape his pain and instead began to absorb it, turning his agony into a form of internal strength. As he moves through this process, his view of spirituality shifts away from the traditional religious dogmas of the Victorian era. He doesn't find God in a church or in a set of moral laws. Instead, he finds a sense of the divine in the individual's capacity to endure and transform suffering. This is where his reimagining of Christ becomes so central to his thought. Wilde doesn't see Christ through the lens of a preacher, but through the lens of an artist. He describes Christ as the supreme poet and the ultimate individualist. To Wilde, Christ was a figure who took the abstract pain of the human condition and turned it into something beautiful and meaningful. He saw Christ's life as a masterpiece of romantic art and profound sympathy. In this view, the artist and the divine are linked by a shared purpose, the ability to take the chaotic, often cruel reality of existence and give it a voice that resonates with the soul. For Wilde, the ultimate act of creation isn't just making something pretty, it is the act of turning sorrow into beauty. This brings us to the tension between the mask and the soul. Throughout his life, Wilde was a master of the mask, the social persona of the witty, flamboyant dandy. He lived according to the rules of a society that demanded a certain performance, but prison stripped that mask away. He found that when you lose the ability to play your social role, you are left with the raw, uncalculable reality of your own soul. He realized that he had spent much of his life living for the eyes of others, following the laws of a Philistine society. He uses the term Philistine to describe the people and the social structures that lacked the imagination to see the depth behind the surface. He mocks those who live in what he calls little cups, those small, shallow lives of triviality and conformity. To Wilde, the Philistine is the person who can only understand life through the lens of morality and law, but cannot understand it through the lens of passion or tragedy. He argues that while the law might judge a person's actions, it can never judge the soul's journey. He suggests that a person's internal necessity to make their own experiences just and right is far more important than the external judgments of a society that is often itself unjust. By the time we reach the latter part of his reflections, Wilde has reached a state of radical acceptance. He describes a moment of profound surrender, where he realizes that after losing his wealth, his reputation, his children, and his very sense of self, he has finally found his soul. It is a paradox. Only by losing everything that the world valued could he find what was truly essential. He describes this as a new life, one centered on the exploration of the shadowed side of existence. He no longer seeks the sunlit ease of his past. He finds a strange, quiet happiness in the depths. This isn't a happy ending in the traditional sense. There is no sudden restoration of his former glory. He doesn't get his money back, his reputation isn't restored, and the scars of his imprisonment remain. Instead, the ending is about a spiritual integration. He looks toward his eventual release in May, looking forward to the natural world, the sea and the sun. He speaks of a desire for a kind of spiritual purification, a way to wash away the stains of his imprisonment in the elements of nature. He hopes to find a mystical harmony with the world, not as a social mask, but as a man who has integrated his suffering into his very being. He is no longer just the man who performed for society. He is a man who has been forged by his own pain. He ends with a sense of hope that is quiet and resilient, suggesting that suffering, while devastating, can be a wonderful beginning for the soul. When we look at the full shape of De Profundis, we see a journey from the external to the internal. It begins with a man reacting to the world, to his lovers, his enemies, and his own social failures. But it ends with a man looking inward, finding a landscape that is far more vast and complex than the London salons he once frequented. Wilde's transformation is a testament to the idea that even in the most claustrophobic and degrading circumstances, there is a capacity for the human spirit to expand, to create meaning, and to find a sense of the divine in the very heart of sorrow. He moved from being a man who lived for sensation to a man who lived for depth, proving that even when everything is taken away, the soul remains a territory that can never be fully conquered.